morning, Central. I know it's been a really difficult week, but I'm so glad that you've made it to Sunday and you're here with us today. I have been sitting at home really troubled about what I could do this week. So today we're going to sing a song that really is a good example of the power of protest through music, and names several activists for peace, for equality, for civil rights specifically, and just really shows the power of singing together, of music, of naming people. So I'm really excited to share it with you. This is Nina Cried Power by Hozier. It's not the waking, it's the rising. It's the grounding low full of compromising. It's not the growing of the light. It's not the opening of eyes. It's not the waking, it's the rising. It's not the shade we should pass it. It's the light and it's the obstacle that casts it. It's the key that draws the light. It's the fire it ignites. It's not the waking, it's the rise. It's not the song, it is the singing. It's the healing of the human spirit. It's the bringing of life. It's the barring of the rhyme. It's not the waking, it's the rise. Cry, power, power, power. Nina cried power, Billy cried power, made us cry power. And I can cry power, power, oh, power. Billy's cried power, Daddy cried power.
Hey, good morning, Central. Welcome to our online worship service this morning. My name is Michael. I'm one of the pastors here and want to be the first to say welcome. We're so glad that you're here with us this morning. Today, I'm not only pastor, I am percussionist extraordinaire. I have no training, so you get what you get today, friends. But we're glad you're here. Listen, it's been our practice over the last couple of weeks to welcome each other in the comment section. So take a minute, let folks know that you're here, say hi to other people. Maybe also hit that like or that share button. who knows who might run into this service when you share it and find something meaningful. So it's the easiest evangelism you will ever do. Go ahead and take a couple moments and do that. While you're doing it, just a couple of brief announcements. Just a reminder, we are not going to have in-person worship during the month of June. We talked about this last Sunday. We just aren't going to be able to do social distancing well. All of the health and denominational leadership is saying you can't do congregational singing, you have to limit capacity. So we're going to hold off for another month or so, folks. But know this, the church isn't closed. We're just adapting and being creative and flexible, and the love of God is still being poured into us and into our community. And so we're going to keep rolling like we have been. But I know you're ready to get back. I am too. We just want to be as safe and responsible in doing that as possible. So thank you for your prayers and your patience. Thank you for your encouragement for me and the leadership team who are having to make these difficult decisions. We really appreciate the community during this time. Last sort of announcement, Nikki Obert has been coordinating the delivery of food for, I think we're up to like 78 families now. It's like 260 people. It's diapers for 92 kids. It's amazing stuff. We need some more drivers. As folks are going back to work, it's getting a little bit complicated trying to make sure we have enough drivers during the week. So if you're free on Tuesday from roughly 9 to 11:30, consider joining our team and dropping off food to families that desperately need it. It'll be a super rewarding part of your week, and it's an easy, tangible way to make a difference here in Galveston. To get more information about that, just reach out to Nikki Obert, and she'd be happy to connect you with details and instructions for how to make that possible. Central, I think that's all the announcements for this morning. So hear these words of welcome that we start with every week, especially if you're new with us today. Whether you are over-churched or under-churched, whether you are a proud evangelical, a recovering evangelical, or not evangelical at all, whether you're used to high church or low church or no church, whether you consider yourself a passionate believer or just a hopeful skeptic, whether you find yourself craving community this morning or burnt out by community, whether you graduated from Penn State or the state Penn, you are welcome in this place. And just as this God of grace and love and mercy has welcomed us in that same grace, love, and mercy, it's so important that you know you're welcome here too. So welcome. We're glad that you're here. I'm going to run back over as we change cameras to go do some more percussion stuff. Welcome to Central, friends. We're glad you're here.
All right, Central, let's worship together.
Sleepless night, I hardly breathe. break every chain, break every chain, break every chain. Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise to all creatures here below. Praise Him above the heavenly host. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen. 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 Amen.
Central, this is the time in our service where we talk about offering. It's one of those things I say the same every week. I think it's important that we get this right. An offering isn't something that can be taken from you. That's called a tax. Instead, an offering is something that has to be given. It has to be offered. So please know this morning you don't have to give to be here. We believe that God's grace is free, but we recognize that God does some amazing things through our community, through the gifts that you provide. And so if you're excited about things like feeding families during this COVID-19 pandemic, or making sure people have access to showers and laundry and meals during the week, or building up a killer youth program like we're trying to do right now, all of those things, we'd ask that you give this morning and you give generously. Well, we serve the most generous being that's ever existed, and so when we're generous, there's a part of us that's like the divine. So there's lots of easy ways to give. The easiest is through our online giving platform. You can access that through our website or our app. Just click on the Giving tab. There's a short form that you'll fill out. You can make it one-time payments or recurring payments. My wife Mariah and I have done recurring just so we don't have to think about it week to week. And it's helpful for us in the church side of things so we can kind of anticipate what giving is going to look like month to month. So please consider signing up for online giving. Or feel free to mail us your checks or to drop them off in the mail slot off of O and a Half. There'll be a slide that's about to pop up that'll give you all the details for that information. So your generosity is making amazing things happen, Central. So thank you for that. Please continue to be generous. That'll pop up, this green slide, and then I'll be back in just a second. So see you in a minute. Welcome back, Central. If you're just logging in with us, my name is Michael. I'm one of the pastors here. We're about to move into our sermon time. I thought it would be appropriate today for us to take a few moments of meditation and reflection before we wrestle with kind of a difficult topic today. We're going to be talking about anger and protest and inequality and racial justice, and it seemed appropriate for us to kind of center ourselves before we do that. I've asked Ezra to sing a song today that was written by a group called Common Hymnal. The song's called Rose Petals, and it's going to serve today as sort of a litany for us as we remember the names of those persons who have lost their lives due to police violence. The scriptures are full of these lists of names, and so it's well within our practice as a church to lament, to cry out, to list off these people for whom God's justice, this good world, the shalom that we talk about every week, this was not. We fell short in these areas. We've got lots of work to do. So sort of a warning, this is an emotional song, it's a heavy song, and it's been a heavy week. And so, especially if you are a person of color who's watching and hearing these names might be triggering or traumatic in some way, you may want to just scoot out for the next couple minutes. I think many of us need to hear this listed off, especially from a church space. But I always want to be sensitive to those so you don't have to relive the trauma you've already experienced this week from news stories and social media. So I'm going to turn this over to Ezra, and then we'll come back with our sermon in just a moment.
Blood of our brother spilled on the street. He was a rose that grew out of the concrete. The same ground where his body lay, like rose petals on a stony grave. Why do we fear each other from the lies of yesterday? I'll never know. Look at all these roses with petals on the ground. They call this one light brown. I'm asking you to look at all these roses with petals on the ground. They call this one Trayvon Martin. I'm asking you to look at all these roses with petals on the ground. They call this one Tyshawn Lee. I'm asking you to look at all these roses with petals on the ground. It's far too many for me. The tears of our mother were spilled at his grave. She knows the cost the whole world could not repay. And when she should have felt her sympathy, all we told her is that her baby was guilty. Do we even have compassion? Do we
I so appreciate Ezra framing my sermon this morning with that song. That was almost a sermon in itself. I want to invite you to turn to the book of Mark, chapter 3. We'll start there. We're going to be talking about Jesus today, interestingly enough. Sometimes the danger, especially in the modern American Western church, is that we work really hard to make following Jesus really attractive. I mean, trying desperately to get people in the door and kind of like, hey, it's great. And then once people are in, we're like, oh, by the way, deny yourself and take up your cross. Kind of like bait and switch. So one of the things we've tried to do here is to be really honest about the fact that following Jesus might mean you get killed for doing the right thing. And of course, we mean that physically, as well as all of the other ways that death can happen. So one of the things we try to do is just be as honest as possible about the difficulty and how fewer and fewer people in our culture seem to be truly interested in living the kind of life Jesus intends for us. Because it's hard, and it takes a lot of work and a lot of discipline. Today, I want to wrestle with one of the difficult things that Jesus says and does and claims. Because we want to be those kinds of people who are revolutionary forces for good in the world. We want to do the hard work, and we want to keep the bar really high. I want my life, like I want to reach for that. So today, we're going to talk about a subject that seems to drag up all sorts of stuff for people. So if you find yourself sitting there like, that will make me very happy, okay? Just so we're clear on that. Let's get into this. So Mark 3, verse 1. Jesus has just had a confrontation with some of the religious leaders called Pharisees. They're hanging in the margins. They are the they we're going to come across in a minute, okay? So chapter 3, verse 1, it says this. Jesus returned to the synagogue. A man with a withered hand was there. Wanting to bring charges against Jesus, they were watching Jesus closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. Now, this Sabbath command comes up over and over and over again in the Torah, which are the first 5 books of the Bible. And central to the Jewish people of Jesus' day, and this day, is the Torah, the first 5 books. Let me hear you say Torah. So in Jesus' day, the goal was to live the Torah. I mean, Jesus even says, I didn't come to get rid of the Torah. I came to show you what it looks like when somebody puts these commands on display. I came to show you what it looks like when somebody lives them, right down to the last punctuation mark. So the goal was to live the Torah. Now, the Torah commanded, this was one of the 613 commands. It commanded to observe the Sabbath, do no work on the Sabbath day, which raised all sorts of fascinating questions. Because one rabbi might say, this is work, this is not. Another rabbi might have a different list of things which were considered work or not. So each rabbi's particular set of what you could do or couldn't do was called that rabbi's yoke. One rabbi came along and said, my yoke is easy. Interesting. Now, every rabbi had a yoke. So when you followed a rabbi, you followed that rabbi's particular set of lists of what you could or couldn't do, depending on the Torah. And so the discussion came, what happens? Because people were discovering that the rules and lists in the Torah sometimes contradicted each other. This happens for us often with the scriptures. They contradict each other. And here's what I mean. The question came about that there were also commands to save life and protect life wherever it needed to be protected and saved. So the question that the rabbis often posed was, what happens when your donkey falls into a hole on the Sabbath? A question many of us have on a regular basis, right? Because if your donkey falls into a hole on the Sabbath, you should do everything you can to save and protect the life of your donkey. But To reach into the hole and pull your donkey out of the hole would be to do work. So you have the command to protect life, but you have the command to observe the Sabbath. What happens when the two commands are at the same place at the same time? You have to pick which command, and the technical word they used was which command is weightier, which command is lighter. Do you break the Sabbath in order to fulfill this command, or do you do the opposite? And so this was the question. We still do this today. We just call it ethics. Simply, what do you do when you have two things that you're trying to do that contradict each other or seem to be opposed to each other? So there were some rabbis who said, you don't save life. You always go with not doing any work. There were other rabbis who said, no, you save life. You save life. So this is the discussion that Jesus wades into. This is one of the 8 great debates of Jesus' day. That was fun to say. An incredibly controversial discussion. So verse 2, wanting to bring charges against Jesus, they were watching Jesus closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. The question is, what is Jesus going to do here? If he heals the man, it'll be breaking the Sabbath. But if he doesn't heal the man, he won't be protecting life. Verse 3, he said to the man with the withered hand, step up where people can see you. Is Jesus looking to pick a fight or what? I mean, Jesus is pushing some buttons here, okay? Stand up where people can see you. In front of everyone. He's purposely setting up controversy here. He has this man come and stand in the middle. So while this guy with the withered hand is standing in front of everyone, verse 4, he said to them, is it legal? So he takes the discussion to a totally different place. Is it legal on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil? To save life or to kill? It's like spiritual kung fu, right? Because the discussion has been, are you on this side or are you on that side? Jesus, pick your side. And Jesus comes into the discussion, has the man stand in the middle, and then says, you tell me, which is better, to do good or to do evil? I mean, what are you going to say? Do evil? I mean, Jesus changes the whole discussion, and he's got them. He's got them, and they hate it. They're mad. Second half of verse 4. But they said, and what does your text say? Nothing. They've got their little kingdom that they're trying to protect, and Jesus has them cornered, and they won't admit it. And when he says to them, which is better, to do good or to do evil, to save life or destroy it, they're so hard-hearted and they're so opposed to Jesus that they won't even answer a basic question. Which is better, to heal this man or not? And they're silent. I just wish the scriptures had any relevance for today. Anyway, verse 5, looking around at them with anger. Jesus looks at them and he's angry. Today, friends, I want to talk about a Jesus who gets angry. Now, for some, there's kind of a flannel graph Jesus who's got Pantene Pro V hair and a little lamb in his arms and no dirt on his white bathrobe. Yeah, this is the other Jesus, okay? This is the Jesus who gets angry. This is this group of people who don't get it, and it makes Jesus furious. Now, the word here for anger is the Greek word orge. Let me hear you say orge. I think it's where we get the word ogre from. Maybe not. I just made that up, but it sounded right, so I'm going to go with it, okay? Yeah, orge, yeah. Now, Aristotle talked about the etymology of this word. He said the word originally, it's an ancient Greek word. It's an impulse accompanied by pain. It's desire mixed with grief. Jesus so clearly wants things to be a certain way. His desire is that they would get it, and yet they don't. And he's filled with grief. It's an anger that's, you're breaking my heart here. It's also in the aorist tense, which I know you find very exciting, as do I. But this is crucial. This isn't a low-grade boiling anger that just sits right below the surface. This isn't a petty, selfish anger that kind of blows its top at little teeny minor offenses and insults. It's an anger that comes on Jesus. It's a temporary state. He has it, and then it passes. It's not the kind of anger that he's carrying around from place to place to place. He sees this scene. He sees this injustice, and he's angry. Today, I want to trace through anger. I want to talk about a Jesus and a God who get angry. Hold your place in Mark and turn with me to the book of Amos, chapter 5. We'll be back in Mark in a moment. Throughout the scriptures, we find a divine anger. We find a God who gets angry at certain things. So let's spend a moment and reflect on what this divine anger looks like. Often, in our efforts to articulate a God of love and grace, we leave out a God of wrath, anger, and judgment. But I want to present you with a simple idea. If you have a God of love, then you're going to have a God who gets angry. And I want to show you why. In Amos 5, God is talking through the prophet Amos to a group of religious people. He's talking to them about their religious rituals and their feasts. And verse 21 says this, I reject your festivals. This is God talking to some religious people. I reject your festivals. I don't enjoy your joyous assemblies. If you bring me your entirely burned offerings and gifts of food, I won't be pleased. In the book of Isaiah, God goes on a similar rant and says, your religious celebrations make me want to puke. I just want to vomit. God hates their gatherings. Let's keep reading. Verse 22. I won't even look at your offerings of well-fed animals. Take away the noise of your songs. I won't listen to the melody of your harps. But let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. This is God talking to a group of religious people. And God says, I wish you would stop playing your God songs. And your gatherings, I hate them. Is God angry here? God says, let justice roll down. Now, what is it here that's got God so cranked up? Turn to chapter 8. This whole book is about a God who's angry about some things. So what are they? Amos 8, verse 4. Hear this, you who trample on the needy and destroy the poor of the land. What's got God so cranked up? These religious people are taking advantage of those who don't have as much as they do. Verse 5, saying, when will the new moon be over, so that we may sell grain, and the Sabbath, so that we may offer wheat for sale? Verse 6, in order to buy the needy for silver, and the helpless for sandals, and sell garbage as grain. He says, you are so obsessed with becoming wealthy that you skimp when you give to those. Like when you sell to those who are hungry, and you take the dirt and you sweep it up with the wheat on the threshing floor, and you sell people wheat mixed with dirt because you know that they're hungry and they'll buy it because they're starving. And you can make money, and you can take advantage of their poverty to make even more money. God says, it makes me furious. You say you follow me, but you exploit the needy in your midst, and you take advantage of their situation to make yourself more money, and I wish you'd stop singing your songs. And I wish you'd stop having your little festivals. They make me sick. This is a God who sees injustice and says, this is wrong, and I'm tired of it. See, when we talk about a God who's angry, perhaps a question we ought to ask is this: which is more disturbing? A God who gets angry, or a God who can see injustice, abuse, and exploitation and not get angry? A God who can see someone taking advantage of someone else and saying, it's not that big of a deal. A God who can see violence and murder and racism and police brutality and saying, not a big deal. See, we're disturbed sometimes by a God who gets angry, but I find it far more disturbing to imagine a God who can see the injustice and abuse and exploitation and not get angry. There is a divine anger with Jesus. He sees injustice. This is not right. This man needs healing, and these religious people want to prevent it, and it's not right, and he's angry. Let's go back to Mark. This question in Mark 3 is this: what does Jesus do with his orge? Like, what is the result of his anger? Verse 5, looking around at them with anger, deeply grieved at their unyielding hearts, he said to the man, stretch out your hand. So he did, and his hand was made healthy. Jesus' anger leads to action that promotes healing and restoration for the most vulnerable and marginalized. Jesus' anger leads to justice. What does your anger lead to? Does it advocate for peace and justice around you? Does it make the world a better place? Does it bring healing to those who need it? You can find this divine anger throughout the scriptures being channeled, all of this nuclear energy and rocket fuel being channeled into really powerful deeds. When people ask questions about purpose or vocation, I'll often respond back with the question, what do you love? What is it that when you do it, you think to yourself, I could do this forever. It's the life of heaven now. Like, what is it that you do and you think like, I was made for this. I feel God's joy when I do this. But I wonder if there's another question we could ask to get at this sense of what we're supposed to do with our lives. Maybe the other question could be, what makes you angry? Like, what just cranks you up? And maybe your calling is somewhere in that question. What is it that when you see it, you think, that is wrong? Somebody should do something about that. And maybe the voice of the Almighty is whispering, that's you. You're the somebody. Maybe the question for you is, what makes you angry? What is it that makes you go, somebody needs to fix that? Maybe that's where your calling is. Let's try an experiment this morning. I want to show you some stats. Let's work through these for a minute. The best data I could find is from the end of 2018, so less than 2 years ago. This is pretty current. In 2018, the number of African Americans in U.S. prisons was at its lowest rate in almost 30 years. And yet, the imprisonment rate of black males was almost 6 times that of white males. The imprisonment rate of black females was almost twice the rate of white females. For every 100,000 black residents, 1,134 were in prison, compared to only 218 for whites. 1,134 black residents in prison for every 100,000, compared to 218 for whites. In 2018, the poverty rate for African Americans was 20.8%. more than twice that for non-Hispanic whites, which was 8.1%. And friends, this has had far-reaching consequences on everything from food security to housing, healthcare, insurance, education. About 40% of our unhoused population in the United States are African Americans, even though they make up just 13% of the country's total population. And most recently, our COVID-19 pandemic pulled back the curtain on the inequality that Black communities face, especially when it comes to health. The COVID racial data tracker found that African Americans have made up 24% of deaths so far, almost twice their population share. And experts have linked this to housing location, healthcare access, underlying health conditions, and the fact that a disproportionate number of people in the community work in sectors that are deemed essential. Among Fortune 500 companies in 2018, only 4 had a Black CEO. And African Americans held only 8.6% of board seats in those companies, compared to 83.9% of seats for whites. So, while the police brutality that killed George Floyd and Breonna Taylor have been the focus of conversation over the last few days, and rightfully so, the kindling that made the house burn down was joblessness, unemployment, poor housing, concentrated poverty, people without opportunity who were just done with that and needed to do something, anything, to get the attention of everybody else to say, this must change. And when we compare that reality to the protests that emerged over access to haircuts and restaurants, I would make the simple observation. We live in a world where people get angry about things that don't matter and don't get angry about things that do matter. Perhaps it's time for the church to get angry about the kinds of things that God gets angry about. There are themes that come up again and again and again in the scriptures, and they generally always involve justice, compassion, generosity. Think about the things you get angry about. Are they things that actually matter? And think about the things you don't get angry about. Are they things that actually matter to God? My observation is that the people I've met who are most engaged with the real needs of a real hurting world have a sense of perspective that frees them from petty, irrational, minor offenses. What you find with Jesus is that he doesn't spend much time complaining about these religious people. He turns his focus from these people he's angry with, who don't get it, to this man who needs healing. We live in a culture where people get angry about things that don't matter, and we don't get angry about the things that do matter to God. This is a quote from a book called The Enigma of Anger by Garrett Kaiser. It says this: Jesus, his is the zeal of an ego that is identified with something larger than itself. He is not incensed over some personal insult, but by a communal sacrilege. He says Jesus has identified himself with something bigger. And so it isn't the petty wounding of an individual ego. It's somebody who's aligned themselves with God's big purposes and justice and healing. And that's what makes him angry. He's angry because there's this wrong that's being done to somebody, and someone needs to step up and do something about it. I've been really frustrated by some of my fellow pastors' responses to questions about systemic racism. They gave some of the most bigoted, lack of compassion, narrow-minded, offensive answers. And I found myself thinking, I don't want anything to do with that person's God. And what made me the most furious was that pastor claimed to be speaking for me. Like this was the thought process of all Christians. And I found myself yelling at my computer screen, no, there are a bunch of us who think that's not what God's like. Sometimes I meet people who are atheists, and I ask them, what kind of God don't you believe in? And they answer, and I often find myself thinking, yeah, I don't believe in that kind of God either. And I realized as I've been sorting through this anger that much of my own energies and what I've given my life to is driven by a sense of divine anger. I'm sick and tired of people speaking for Jesus who I think have missed the point. And I realize that this drives me in ways that I've never been aware of. And hopefully it brings about healing and restoration and justice. We just hired a new youth director, Chad Smith. I want our youth group kids to grow up in a culture, in a world where when they say Christian and are given a blank sheet, people say love, compassion, acceptance, humility, creativity, great art, innovation, justice. I want to help change the adjectives. I want our youth group kids to grow up in a world where people are true to the teachings of Jesus in such a way that you can't deny this compelling force for good. And I've realized in my own life, there is a divine anger that drives me. I want to see things changed. And you're no different. You have the same kinds of things that churn within you. And the question is, what are you going to do with it? We all have the same choices. To be angry about things that don't matter, or, like Jesus, to channel it into things that bring about the healing and the restoration and the justice that God so desperately wants for God's world. I want a vision for something that's bigger than myself. We need a vision for something that's bigger than ourselves. Maybe today that's your prayer. God, give me a vision where I can serve, for where I can help. Give me a vision for channeling this nuclear energy that churns inside me. Help me to turn that into something really good. Let's pray. God, speak to each of us this morning. Convict us of petty, insignificant anger that has nothing to do with the life that you offer us. God, for those of us here who have been looking for a fight because we've realized we aren't in one, give us a fight. Give us something big, something glorious, something that just captures us with mission and purpose. God, we want to change the adjectives. God, I pray for those of us who feel like we have everything, like we've made it, like we have the house and the cars and the stuff, and yet it's honestly a bit empty. Please spark a divine anger for something better. God, for those of us who feel like they have their whole life ahead of them, my brothers and sisters who stand on the brink of their future and are looking for something to give their life to, please help them discover what they love. And if that doesn't help, what makes them angry? We want to recapture the dream of the prophet Amos. We want to be Jesus in the synagogue. Give us a vision of something bigger than ourselves and what we can do. God, this morning we ask that you speak to each of us. And it's in the name of this Jesus who got angry that we pray. Amen. Friends, thanks for joining us this morning. Ezra is going to come lead us in one more song. But before we do that, hear these words of benediction. These are just good words. Central, may you be the kind of people who channel this nuclear divine anger. And as you rage in the world, may you leave in your wake a trail of hope and healing and restoration and justice. May you be that people. All that means for us around here is go and be central. Go and be angry. See you next week.